Hello everyone, and welcome to Lesson 1 of this Snare Drum Mastery 101 course with your instructor Josh Lappin. And today we're going to get started with Lesson 1 in the course and start exploring all the topics and techniques in Lesson 1. Lesson 1 is kind of our foundational course here. It's where we're going to introduce all our notes that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the course, and all the corresponding rest, and kind of just get you started looking at the different notes and getting used to them, and start you off also with some basic reading exercises. So in lesson 1, to get started, let's go ahead and introduce the notes that we're going to be using throughout this course and throughout this lesson as well. As I've said before in the introduction, just a quick recap here. It's important to learn how to read notation in music for a variety of reasons. One of them is that it makes you a better, more rounded musician, and it also gives you a way to learn more about your instrument. If you get stuck, you need to learn something new. If you can read, you can go buy books and videos that will explain different techniques and styles. And you'll be able to go through those on your own and learn a lot more about music and drumming than you would if you just had to try to pick it out by ear. There's nothing wrong with playing by ear. I think everybody needs to know how to do that as well. But reading gives you an advantage, and it helps you be more valuable as a musician because other musicians can write their ideas and communicate them to you effectively. Also, too, there will be some passages in certain drumming patterns that'll be complicated enough that you won't be able to distinguish them with your ear alone. But if they're written down and you know how to read, you'll be able to figure out exactly what that other drummer was doing. All right, so let's get started then. Learned about the notes. These are primarily the notes that we're going to be using in this course here, and the notes that you'll see throughout most music, definitely in the drum set, but even with other instruments. Now with drumming, for this course, we're not going to be doing anything with pitch, which means since we're pretty much only be playing the snare drum, we're not going to concern ourselves with trying to notate the notes on the staff in a way that would notate pitch or a different instrument. So that's one thing you won't have to worry about in this course. In future courses you will, but in this one it's going to be pretty straightforward. Here are our basic notes that we're going to use. We will have our whole note, which just looks like kind of a circle here. Our half note looks like a circle, but it has the stem. This one happens to be going down. They can go either up or down. If it went up, it would be on this side. Quarter note looks very similar to the half, but it is filled in completely here. The eighth note has the little flag here, but you can see it's got a curve, which indicates it's an eighth note. 16th note, double flag there, and then 32nd note has the triple flag. Music can also go up to 64th, but for the purposes of this course, we are not going to explore those at this time. All right, so with the notes, there has to be a corresponding rest as well. Because you can't always play. Sometimes you have to stop, and sometimes you want to stop for either rest purposes or for musical purposes. So we have to have a way of notating that as well. So, like I said, each corresponding note has a corresponding rest. So this is the whole rest. One of the ways I remember it is that it is usually under the line. So that means it kind of looks like a little hole in the ground. Half note is over the line. Sort of looks like a little hat. Quarter note rest looks kind of like a little lightning bolt. This is what the eighth note rest looks like, and it's going to follow the similar pattern to the actual note. The rest will have a flag that corresponds to it. This has got the one little marking. 16th note has the 2, and 32nd has the 3. All right, so these things by themselves really don't mean anything until you actually assign a value to the note. And when you assign a value to a note, that's when you're going to be able to actually make some rhythms, make some patterns, make some music. Also, too, before we get going, we're going to introduce the note values as they would be in a 4/4 time signature, which we'll get into more detail, especially when we get into the reading exercises. It'll make a lot more sense. But for now, just a quick overview of the time signature. 4/4 means that you're going to be using the quarter note as your base note, and that there should be an equivalent of 4 in each measure. The measure is just the subdivisions here. Got a line here which indicates measure, another measure, measure, measure. All right, so the value of the notes. This is kind of how that the notes are subdivided. In 4/4 time, it would make a lot of sense, but you can also subdivide them in other time signatures as well. So for 4/4 time, using the whole note, this is our whole note. Remember, we have to be able to equal up to the 4. That's our goal, to equal up to 4. So these have to equal up to 4 in some way. So a whole note equals 4 all by itself. So one whole note in 4/4 time signature would take up the whole measure. Now the way to play that we're going to demonstrate later, but just know that, like I said, it's got to equal up to 4 some way. Now the half note would be the division of the whole note here. So as you can see, it takes 2 half notes to make a whole note. Remember, goals equal 4. So this is how the whole note would be constructed. It takes 2 whole notes to make, 2 half notes to make up a measure. If we divide the half note again, we'll get quarters. And if we're talking about 4/4 time, it'll take 4 of those to make up your measure, which is where they get the 4/4 time signature, based on the quarter note. If we divide the quarter notes again, each, as you see, as you divide them, the values get smaller, which we're going to need because as you go down the pyramid, you get more notes, which indicates you're playing more notes within a constrained space. So that would indicate somewhat of speed, but that would also be determined by your beats per minute. Okay, so eighth notes, it's going to take 8 of those, as you can see. Now we'll talk about this in another lesson, but this is just how it's broken out right now. Eighth notes, and then you divide the 8th note again, and you would get 16th. And you can see that, I'm not going to get into the 16th note theory right now, but if we go and count each of these, I'm not going to go all the way through it, but you would eventually end up with 16 there. And then you just divide them again and you would get 30-second notes. So this is a handy little chart to see how the notes get subdivided and how the different values of the notes start to form. And like I said, right now, this may not make a lot of sense, but once we start going through the reading exercises, they'll start making a lot more sense. We've kind of already discussed the 4/4 time signature, but the main objective is just to equal up to 4. And you can use any combination of the notes above that we discussed to equal 4. And you'll see those coming up very soon. But just again, just to reemphasize, when you have the subdivisions here and the staff, you would have your measure. There should also be 5 of these little guys here, 5 of lines. I know I'm running out of space, but 5 lines there to make up your measure. Since these are quarter notes, it should take 4 of them to make one measure. Okay? All right. Now, the way that the notes are constructed, we need to assign, like I said, we have values for them, but we need to understand how to play each of the notes. So for the whole note, what would happen, and we'll demonstrate on this on the practice pad here in an interactive video here, but with a whole note, you would get 1 hit on your practice pad or snare drum, followed by 2, 3, and 4, which would be silent. And again, the whole note would take up the entire measure. So you would get 1 hit or beat, and the rest would be silent, equaling up to a total of 4. With the whole rest, basically you would just play the whole measure would be silent. Half would be half of what we have in the whole note. So you would get 1 beat and 1 silent part of silence, and it's going to take 2, if you go back and look at the chart, 2 half notes to make the whole note. So you can put 2 half notes in one measure. Half rest, which just means you get 2 counts of silence. Then the quarter note, it's kind of a 1-on-1 ratio. You'll get 1 beat for every quarter note you see, and with quarter rest you get 1 beat of silence. Eighth notes, we start getting a little more divided, a little more complicated. It's a half of a quarter note, so it takes 2 eighth notes to equal 1 quarter note. And what you do is you count each eighth note as a 1, and then the other note would be the and. So you'd have 1 and, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. Eighth rest is a half beat of rest. And then the 16th note, we divide the 8th note into 2. So as you remember in our chart, if you want to scroll back up and look at it, each set of 8th notes would have 4 notes grouped with that, which would make up your 16 notes. Those are counted as 1 E and A. And like I said, it takes 4 16 notes to equal 1 quarter note. And the 16th rest is kind of a quarter of a rest. Okay? All right, now what we want to do is we want to start putting some of this into play when we go over to our practice pad in a little bit here. We'll do some exercises using the quarter notes. But right before we do that, I just want to briefly discuss the other time signatures that we'll be using in the course. Like I said, 4/4 is our main time signature that we're going to be using. If you think about a piece of music, just count it as 1, 2, 3, 4. For those of you already familiar with the drum set, 4/4 time would usually end up with something like a 1 and 3 on the bass drum or kick drum, and 2 and 4 on the snare drum. But you do have other time signatures, and those are useful in music. Such as the 2/4, the 3/4, and the 6/8, which are other ones we'll be discussing. And those are the ones that are most likely to appear in popular music that most people play. There are other time signatures, but for the constraint of the course, we won't be discussing those at this time. But if you can play in those 4 right there, you're about 95% of the way already. And then once we do our reading exercises, we'll do a little bit with the metronome as well. All right, the next part of the lesson 1 was going to be the videos, showing you our exercises here and showing you a little bit about how to use the metronome.